Today on Retro Recaps we'll be tuning into the first edition of Anime Bonanza, where we flip through the channels and take a look at some obscure or long-forgotten anime. Today's edition presents a particularly wacky batch of 80s extravagance. We'll be watching 3 different obscure series from the golden age of anime, starting with future police Urashiman. The story opens on a stormy night in Tokyo in 1983, where a young delinquent is engaged in a car chase with the police. As he proclaims his innocence, he almost runs over a worker on the road but manages to turn at the last second and ends up driving off the overpass. While in the air, his car is struck by some kind of magical lightning that transports him to the year 2050, where he immediately crashes into a police car. Meanwhile, a scientist celebrates the detection of a time slip, and he names the man who came through the time slip Urashiman. The scientist then reports back to the ominously named shadowy figure Mr. Führer, who is the leader of the criminal empire Kinnikuman. Upon hearing of the Urashiman's arrival, Mr. Führer comments that it's time to prepare a welcome party for him while laughing maniacally. Meanwhile, Claude, the traffic cop who Urashiman rear-ended, is shocked to see how old the car is. As he attempts to drive off, Claude shoots out Urashiman's wheels, leading him to crash into one of Claude's female fans. Urashiman is then taken to jail where he is interrogated by Claude, but he doesn't remember his name or his age or anything else. Of course, Claude doesn't believe him and goes to beat him up. As this is happening, a wealthy man named Ludovic, who works for Mr. Führer, watches from afar and tells his subordinates Milan and Gitanda to bring Urashiman to him. They blow up the prison wall, allowing Urashiman to escape. Milan and Gitanda attempt to intercept him but he runs past them saying he doesn't need their help. So they try to capture him. As he is hiding from both the criminals and the police, Claude manages to handcuff him. Fleeing together, they end up in a church where they encounter Sister Sophia. She tries to convince Claude to unlock the handcuffs but Claude reveals that he lost the key. Meanwhile, Milan and Gitanda arrive outside. Gitanda enters the church only to find Sophia praying by herself. Claude and Urashiman have already escaped. The two are eventually saved by Inspector Gondo, director of the police scientific crime squad, who appears to know a lot about Urashiman and the time slip. He gives him the name Ryu Urashima. Gondo tells Urashima that he may have gained psychic powers when he underwent the time slip, which is what is known as the Urashima effect. And he wants him and Claude to work together in fighting Kinnikuman. The duo aren't too happy about the idea so they steal the key to the handcuffs and run off. While Urashima escapes in a police car, Gondo notifies Claude that he has been promoted to the position of detective in the mobile mecha division. Claude chases Urashima to a dodgy part of town where they meet Sophia again. She takes him and his cat Maya back to church where she tells him to seek redemption. Meanwhile, Ludovic tells Milan about his plan to rob a bank. They plan on using Urashiman's psychic abilities to penetrate the vault. Milan manages to convince Urashima to come with them by telling him they know a way for him to go back to the past. And Claude follows them and watches as they try to get Urashima to use his psychic powers to see through the back wall of the bank so they know when the vault's open. Sophia shows up with a bunch of criminals to stop them but it turns out they're all members of Kinnikuman and they immediately turn on her. This angers Sophie, who then pulls a gun out, but this doesn't really help because all of the criminals have their guns pointed on her. Urashima tells them that the vault is open, so Milan and Gitanda jump into their vehicle and drill through the wall which gives Urashima and Claude the opportunity to fight off some of the thugs and make a run for it. However, the criminals take Sophia hostage and so Claude and Urashima have to work together to save her. In the end, Urashima, Sophie, and Claude agree to work together for Inspector Gondo. That's all for Urashiman. If you want to find out what happens next, like this video and leave a comment down below. Next up is the 1983 anime Kinnikuman, adapted from the popular manga of the same name. This has to be one of the craziest anime of the 80s, which is saying a lot. Let's take a look. The Gyuden Society is honoring its president, Kinnikuman, when suddenly a UFO crashes right outside the restaurant. It lifts up in the air and begins to play an off-key theme. Kinnikuman starts playing back on a piano, and a musical back and forth ensues between him and the UFO, much to the dismay of everyone in the area. Suddenly, a small alien named Meat descends from the UFO and calls Kinnikuman a prince. Apparently, Kinnikuman is actually the prince of planet Kinniku. The little alien explains that 20 years ago, the king and queen of Kinniku went on a holiday to planet Earth with their newborn son. However, when a pig suddenly appeared on their son's bed, they accidentally threw the prince out of the spaceship, thinking he was the pig, because the two looked so alike. That's how the prince landed in Japan. After learning that the Kinniku clan are superheroes, superior to all other heroes, Kinnikuman opens up to the idea of returning to planet Kinniku. But he's still reluctant to go along, So Meat Dude puts him in a deathmatch ring where he must defeat this giant green guy called Gariki. If he wins, Meat will do as he wishes, but if he loses, Kinnikuman will return to planet Kinniku. Gariki easily overpowers Kinnikuman, but after seeing the absurd faces Kinnikuman is pulling while he holds him in a bear hug, Gariki starts laughing so hard that he falls to the ground and his insides explode. And so, Kinnikuman wins the fight. Just like that, the second half of the episode deals with the appearance of Kinkotsuman, a member of the Chojin Monster Corps, who unleashes a kaiju-style monster called Abdullah in Japan. Just as Kinnikuman is flying in to save the day, an American hero named Terriman flies past him and shoots the monster to pieces. And then promptly presents his invoice to the Japanese Prime Minister. While Terriman becomes more and more popular, Kinnikuman is generally disliked and people mostly just find him disgusting, and so he quickly falls into obscurity. One day Terriman comes to visit Kinnikuman and informs him that the Japanese people have unanimously voted for him to become their sole superhero, meaning that Kinnikuman is no longer needed. However, Kinnikuman dislikes Terriman because he makes people pay for his services, which Kinnikuman deems immoral. As they are arguing, another monster appears outside. A boy whose father has been taken by the monster comes to Terriman asking him to help, but Terriman asks for a payment from the boy and kicks him when the boy doesn't offer enough money. In response to this, Kinnikuman punches him in the face and helps gather the coins from the boy's broken piggy bank. Afterwards, Kinnikuman sets off to save the day himself. However, because he is no longer an officially recognized superhero, the Japanese military open fire on him. In the end, Terriman teams up with Kinnikuman to defeat the monster. The second episode opens with Kinnikuman and Meat watching a TV program about the Loch Ness Monster. Kinnikuman decides to go to the TV station and pitch his idea to exterminate Nessie in order to become the world's #1 superhero. The first thing he does after arriving at the station is autograph the forehead of a young woman because he mistakenly believes she's a fan of his. While the station producer is reading Kinnikuman's rudimentary pitch for taking out Nessie, a monster appears outside the building. Naturally, Kinnikuman jumps on the occasion to show off his fighting prowess. Unfortunately, he immediately steps on a car and falls headfirst into a subway entrance. After freeing himself, he finally starts fighting the monster and manages to take him out with relative ease, to which the producer responds by hiring him. Turns out, the monster was just Meat in a costume. Kinnikuman and the crew then travel to Loch Ness where they are confronted with the real Nessie. The monster starts knocking Kinnikuman around like he's a basketball and sends him flying into outer space, where Meat feeds Kinnikuman a garlic clove to give him strength. Yes, you heard that right. That last sentence wasn't a fever dream, that's actually what happens in the show. However, Kinnikuman flies straight into Nessie's mouth. Everyone outside thinks he's dead and starts praying for him, but he's actually still alive in the monster's stomach. And he eventually manages to escape by crawling out of the other end of the monster. The story ends with Kinnikuman returning to the TV producer and begging him to let him fight the abominable snowman this time around. The second half of the episode starts with Meat telling Kinnikuman more information about planet Kinniku. Apparently, the pig who was mistaken for Kinnikuman as a baby has grown up and has now entered the Kinniku Combat Olympics where he became the champion. He then went on to challenge King Kinniku himself for the All-Universe Championship belt, and he beat him. After becoming its new leader, the pig then transformed planet Kinniku into a planet ruled by pigs, and the king has locked himself away in his castle with his family. Kinnikuman agrees to return to planet Kinniku. There, he is greeted by his family who reveal that his true name is Suguru, and after some convincing he agrees to avenge his father by taking on King Tun. The first round is a judo match, which Kinnikuman immediately loses. Then, they move on to boxing, which he loses again. The third round is wrestling, and King Tun wins once more, retaining his title as the champion. However, just then, a tonkatsu chef shows up. He accuses King Tun of running away from his shop 20 years ago and is determined to turn him into cutlets. He then proceeds to chase him into outer space, to which the queen offers the only appropriate response. King Kinniku then picks up the belt and proclaims himself the champion again. The king and queen then ask Meat to accompany Suguru back to Earth. They don't find him very reliable and have decided to adopt instead. They introduce Tatsunori, who is based on a real professional baseball player from the 80s. And so, Kinnikuman heads back to Earth, dejected. And if you want to hear more of Kinnikuman's insane adventures, let me know in the comments down below. Now, let's move on to our last show for today, which is Haai Step Jun from 1985. One morning, Jun's mother comes to wake her up but finds a robot in her daughter's bed. She tells her husband that Jun has turned into a robot. He goes upstairs to see it and the robot grabs hold of him. Meanwhile, Jun wakes up in her little workshop. She walks out and is happy to see that her robot, Kichinosuke, is up and running. She uses a little device to power him down a little. Jun explains that she's been working on this robot for 6 months and wanted to surprise her parents with it. After Jun is almost run over by a gang of bikers on her way to school with Kichinosuke, a boy named Zero stops to see if she's okay and Jun immediately falls in love with him, seeing him as her knight in shining armor. She then asks the boy for a ride to school. While she's fantasizing about him being in love with her, he mistakenly drops her off at the elementary school. She explains that she's actually in the same class as him, and he responds that he didn't notice because he has no interest in girls his age. He then rides off without her. Witnessing this, Kichinosuke flies off to get revenge on Zero. The robot arrives at the college and starts chasing Zero around in front of the whole school. Jun arrives just in time to shut Kichinosuke down. Following this incident, both Zero and Jun are summoned to the principal's office where they are reprimanded. Afterwards, Jun apologizes to Zero but he says not to worry about it as long as she keeps her toy on a tight leash from now on. Kichinosuke then proceeds to steal Zero's motorbike and take it apart. Zero assumes it's the biker gang Rom earlier that stole it because they've been looking for a fight with him for a long time, and Jun tries to tell him the truth but he doesn't listen and runs off to confront the gang. Jun arrives and calls Kichinosuke over with the handlebars from Zero's bike to prove that it's actually her fault. However, this doesn't stop the gang from beating him up. In the end, Jun gets Kichinosuke to start messing with their bike so that they decide to leave. Later, Jun helps Zero put his bike back together and he's impressed with her mechanical skills. She invites him over to eat at her family's restaurant afterwards and Jun's father tells Kichinosuke to keep an eye on them from now on. And that's the first episode of Haai Step Jun. If you want to find out what happens next on this wacky comedy, let me know in the comments down below. That's it for today's anime bonanza. See you soon and I hope you tune in to the next one.